What's going on, everybody? This is Sean of Raw Select Music. Today I want to talk about this record right here. This is 14KT's For My Sanity from his apparently ongoing jazz series called IAMBEENIE, and it was released on First Word Records in 2019. This was, at the beginning of the year, my most anticipated record. I am a huge fan of 14KT. I think he's one of the best hip-hop producers at the moment. And from the one track that I had heard from this record, The Power of Same, I was really excited to hear the direction that 14KT was taking his music. I really thought the prospect of a 14KT jazz album had a lot of promise. And now that I've given this record quite a few listens, I wanted to share my thoughts and opinions with you and let you know whether or not I think this record's worth checking out. So with that little introduction out of the way, let's talk about this guy. Beep, beep. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with who 14KT is, he is a producer from Ypsilanti, Michigan, and he's been going for quite some time. And what was one of his biggest claims to fame in the beginning of his career was he used some of the most minimal equipment setups that you can think of. I think I remember hearing in one interview that he actually used a audio editing program to make some of his earliest beats and did everything by way of waveform, which is pretty impressive in and of itself. I would say all of his releases are worth checking out, but if you pay attention on this channel, you know I've already talked about this record right here, The Golden Hour, and I feel like a lot of the sound from this record actually translated over to this record. Much like this one felt like a very personal and reflective album, I gotta say this one is also a fairly reflective and personal album, and it really feels like that from front to back. But where this record definitely still had many hip-hop moments on it and definitely had some really hard-hitting moments. By the way, recommend this album highly. 14KT was not kidding. This is a jazz album. Now, jazz is definitely sort of the main inspiration behind a lot of the songs on here, but it is not a traditional jazz record in the sense of it being like a hard bop or a jazz funk record. There are elements of jazz funk, jazz fusion, and a lot of funk, soul, and a little bit of hip hop, and even a little bit of Latin. But for the majority of this record, I gotta say, 14KT has really managed to carve out a very unique and interesting sound for himself on here. And one of the things that really stands out to me, just knowing 14KT through following him on Instagram and with all of his production work leading up to this record, is the fact that despite that the drums on this record sound very much like a live drummer, it was all done with drum programming. That in and of itself makes this record worth checking out, because I feel like the drum programming work that 14KT did on this record is in another stratosphere. It's unbelievable some of the intricate patterns that he's come up with on this record and made them sound so alive and so loose and so much like the way a seasoned jazz drummer would sound. And knowing that it was all programmed by him is just absolutely incredible. For that reason alone, I recommend checking this record out, because once you realize that the drums on here were programmed, it's just positively mind-blowing. But drums do not make an album all by themselves, and I also have to commend 14KT on his arrangement work on here. As he discusses in the liner notes of this record, he said he really wanted to make something that felt less sequenced, more freeform, and more organic, and I really feel like he's accomplished that. A lot of the tracks on here really just have a different flow to them. They don't really seem to have the same sort of rigid bar structure that some tracks do, albeit the bars do exist, but they do so in a way that it does sort of catch you off guard from time to time. In terms of the general atmosphere on here, it's very much synth and keyboard led, and all the synths on here sound really, really colorful. They all sound tons of pleasant, nice melodies, as well as some emotionally poignant, powerful moments on here. And the general feel of this record, much like I said about The golden hour is there's a feeling of sort of reflection, and there's a feeling of something weighing heavily on 14KT's shoulders, whether it's society in general, the day-to-day grind, and just a whole assortment of other topics on here. But that doesn't mean that the entire record is completely somber. Actually, there are quite a few uplifting moments on here, and one of my favorite tracks on this record is Sunday Yellow. I love the Latin-inspired drums on here and the really joyful melody that this track has. I will say that is the exception, but the majority of the record does seem to be sort of drenched in this highly reflective and very meditative atmosphere, and it really starts from the introduction track, Advent, that quickly leads into the second track on here, Down the Street from Peace, which I could have swore was the name of a soul track before this record came out, but if I'm wrong, let me know down in the comments. And I feel like this track kicks off the record perfectly. There's a flurry of drums, there's a nice little guitar lick that kicks in, and there's just like this beautiful synth atmosphere that just sets the mood for this record perfectly. Mainstream moves in with a flurry of hard-hitting drums and a really cool guitar melody as well, which also then leads into the centerpiece track on here, The Power of Same. It's got some really nice vocals. It's got a really beautiful keyboard line later on in the track. The beginning part of the track starts off quite nice, but it really starts getting good towards the end of the track when it completely shifts into this really cool keyboard section. Moving on from there, already talked about Sunday's Yellow, and then the next track, which really feels like this super cool flute-led hip-hop jazz funk track, and it's actually one of my favorite tracks on this record. Quite honestly, this whole first half of the record, completely flawless, no complaints. I would recommend this record off the strength of the A-side alone. B-side that I'm a little less excited about, but it really doesn't damper the quality of the record too much. From there, 14 Missing, Moonwinder, The Late Bird, and Nothing to Lose But Our Chains are all really cool, reflective, almost spiritual jazz pieces, and these are probably the most abstract of all the songs on here. Where most of the groove-laden tracks were on the beginning of the record, it seems like here is where it's starting to get into the really melancholic tracks on here. And also, this is the part of the record that I find to be sort of the most indistinguishable from the rest of the tracks on here. Don't get me wrong, I like the sound of these songs, but in general, from 14 Missing to The Late Bird, all the tracks really blend together for me. Not saying that they're bad, but I do find that they're sort of hard to distinguish from each other unless I'm really listening very intently. The next track, Nothing to Lose But Our Chains, is a nice little interlude track that actually has a very haunting melody to go along with the message of the song. And then the album closes out with yet another seemingly short little interlude track with Purple Flame, which the album finishes off on the title track For My Sanity, which has easily the most insane drum programming on this record, and is also by far the most somber and easily the most reflective track on this record. You can really feel that there's a lot of emotion behind this track. So for me, this last track is definitely another late album highlight. Overall, I gotta say I really like this project, and it's definitely gunning for one of my favorite records of 2019. It's a nice, emotional, poignant listen. I really like the fact that 14KT is stretching himself out as a producer, and I really think he did a hell of a job with what he put out on this record. The music is top-notch, the musicianship is top-notch, the atmosphere on here is top-notch, it's emotionally powerful, it's a great meditative record to listen to. And the only real sore spot for me is, like I said, those 3 tracks on the B-side keep it from what I would otherwise consider to be a fairly flawless record. But they're not enough to damper my excitement and praise for this record, so I highly recommend, if you have not checked out 14KT's For My Sanity, this one gets a high recommendation from me. So that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thanks as always for watching. If you've listened to this record, let me know what you thought about it down in the comments. If you want to check out this record for yourself, please head over to my WordPress or Steemit blogs, because that's where I post music links to any of the records that I talk about on this channel. And as always, please head over to my Mixcloud so you can check out Raw Select Radio, where I play records that I talk about on this YouTube channel, as well as other records in my collection that I don't get a chance to talk about. Links for everything, as always, down in the description. But that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thanks as always for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. So until then, peace out!